You already have a picture of Jesus in your head. Right now, close your eyes and he's there. Tall, calm, flowing brown hair parted down the middle, soft features, pale skin, maybe blue eyes, a neat beard. You've seen that face 10,000 times on walls, in films, in the little picture your grandmother kept. Here's the problem. That man never existed. Not the way you're picturing him. That face, the one burned into your memory, the one an entire civilization agreed on, is almost certainly wrong. And not wrong in some small way. Wrong in the way a stranger's face is wrong. If the real Jesus of Nazareth walked past you on the street, you would not recognize him. You might not even look twice.
So here's the question this whole video is going to answer, and I'm going to hold you to it, because the answer at the end is stranger and more moving than the mystery. The question is this: if that famous face is wrong, where did it come from? Who invented it? And what did the real man actually look like? Stay with me, because to get to the real face, we have to do something uncomfortable first. We have to take the fake one apart. And I want to say something before we start, because this matters. This is not an attack on anyone's faith. It's the opposite. The real Jesus, the actual man, in an actual place, with an actual face, is more powerful than the painting, not less. By the end of this, I think you'll see him more clearly than you ever have. That's a promise. So, let's start with the face you know. Where did it come from? Because here's the first shock. The Bible, the actual text, the Gospels, the eyewitness accounts, never describes his face. Not once.
Think about that. The most painted, most sculpted, most depicted human being in the history of the world. And the 4 documents written closest to his life do not tell you the color of his eyes, the length of his hair, whether he was tall or short, handsome or plain. Nothing. There is a deafening silence where the description should be. And that silence is actually your first real clue. But hold on to it, because it doesn't mean what most people think it means. We'll come back to it. And when we do, it's going to turn the whole thing around. And then, gradually, the images started to appear. And here's the key thing. When Christianity spread into the Roman and Greek world, the new artists had a problem. They needed to show Jesus as divine, as powerful, as a king. And they already had a visual language for divine, powerful king. It was their own gods. So look at what they reached for. The long hair, the beard, the robes, the calm authority radiating out of the face. That's not a Galilean carpenter. That's Zeus. That's Jupiter. That's the Greco-Roman image of a supreme god, borrowed wholesale and handed to Jesus. They dressed him in the costume of the gods their grandparents had worshipped, because that was the only way they knew to say, this one is divine. The face you picture isn't a memory of Jesus. It's a memory of Zeus wearing Jesus' name. And once that image locked in, it just kept going. Each generation of artists copied the one before. The Byzantines formalized it. The long, straight nose, the parted hair, the solemn eyes. Then the Renaissance masters, the Leonardos and the Michelangelos, painted him again as a European, softer, paler, more refined. They painted him to look like the ideal man of their own time and place, which is to say, like them. And then, much later, one single painting did more damage than all the rest combined. In 1940, an American artist named Warner Sallman painted a picture called The Head of Christ. You have seen it. Even if the name means nothing to you, you have seen it. A serene, soft-lit,
light-haired, distinctly Northern European Jesus, gazing off to one side. That single painting was reproduced over 500 million times. 500 million! It went into homes, churches, Bibles, hospitals, prisons, army chapels, all across the 20th century. For a huge share of the modern world, that painting simply became what Jesus looks like.
A blondish, fair-skinned man painted by a Chicago artist in 1940, based on earlier European paintings, based on Renaissance paintings, based on Byzantine icons, based on the borrowed face of a Greek god. That's the chain. Not one link in it is a Galilean carpenter. Not one link in it is an eyewitness. It's copies of copies of copies of an invention. So now you feel the full weight of the problem. The face you know isn't a photograph that got a little distorted over time. It's a work of the imagination that never had anything to do with his actual appearance in the first place. Which brings us back to the real question. If all of that is wrong, what did he actually look like? And here's where it gets exciting, because we are not guessing blindly. We actually know a great deal. We just have to look at the right evidence instead of the paintings. We have 3 witnesses, and I'm going to bring them in one at a time. The first witness is the ground itself, archaeology. We know with real confidence what first-century Galilean Jews looked like, because we have found them. We have their skeletons, their skulls, their bones, their tombs. We have the physical remains of the actual population Jesus lived and died among. And from those remains, forensic scientists can reconstruct a face. In 2001, a British forensic artist named Richard Neve did exactly that. He was not trying to reconstruct Jesus personally. Nobody has Jesus' skull. What he did was more honest and, in a way, more useful. He took an actual first-century skull from the region, and using the same forensic techniques police use to reconstruct crime victims from their remains, tissue depth data, muscle structure, anthropological data about the population, he built the face of a typical Galilean Jewish man from exactly Jesus' time and place. In other words, not Jesus' face, but the face of the men Jesus would have been indistinguishable from, the face in the crowd. And since the Gospels themselves suggest there was nothing remarkable about how Jesus looked, more on that in a moment, this may be as close as we will ever get. So what did that face look like? It's a shock the first time you see it, precisely because it's so ordinary. Olive brown skin, tanned and weathered by a life outdoors, a broad face, a wide nose, dark brown eyes, short dark hair, cropped close, not flowing, a short dark beard. And the man was not tall and willowy. He was short and solid. The reconstructions and the skeletal record together suggest a height of around 5 feet to 5 feet 5 and a strong, muscular build. The build of a man who worked with his body every day. Because that's the second thing we know, and it changes the picture completely. Jesus was not by trade a soft-handed teacher. The Gospels call him a tekton, usually translated carpenter, but the word is broader than that. It means a craftsman, a builder, someone who worked with wood and very likely stone. For roughly the first 30 years of his life, the overwhelming majority of it, that's what he did. Physical labor, outdoors in the Galilean sun, 6 days a week. So put the real details together. A short, powerfully built man, weathered, sun-darkened skin, rough, calloused, scarred hands, dark eyes,
dark cropped hair, a dark beard, dusty feet and worn sandals, a simple knee-length tunic and a woolen cloak. A working man, a laborer, someone who, if he walked into a modern room in a suit, you would peg as anything but the figure in the painting. He looked, in the words of one scholar, exactly like what he was, a Jewish Galilean of the 1st century. Unremarkable, ordinary, one face among many. And now we come to the second witness, and this one is the Bible itself, speaking in a way most people completely miss. Because I told you the Gospels never describe his face. That's true. But there are 2 places in Scripture that give us something, and they point in the same direction as the bones. The first is a line in the prophet Isaiah, written centuries before, that Christians have always read as pointing to the Messiah. And listen to what it says about him. It says he had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. Nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. That is the opposite of the glowing, radiant, better-than-human face in the paintings. The text is saying he was plain. He was ordinary looking. There was nothing about his face that would make you stop and stare. If anything, the prophecy insists on his ordinariness, because the whole point being made is that people would overlook him, underestimate him, walk right past the most important man who ever lived because he looked like nobody special. The paintings make him impossible to miss. The prophecy says he was easy to miss. Which of those sounds more like the God who was born in a stable and grew up in a town so unimportant that people literally asked, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" Hold that, because there's one more biblical clue, and it's the one that finally cracks the mystery of the silence wide open. The third witness is the strangest, and it comes from the very last book of the Bible, Revelation. Because there, finally, someone does describe Jesus. The Apostle John, exiled and old, has a vision of the risen, glorified Christ, and he reaches for words to describe him. But watch what he says. He says the hair on his head was white like wool, as white as snow. His eyes were like blazing fire. His feet were like bronze glowing in a furnace. His face was like the sun shining in all its brilliance. Now, some people read that and say, see, white hair, so Jesus was... No, stop. That's not a physical description of the carpenter from Nazareth. John isn't telling you Jesus had white hair and metal feet. This is the language of vision, of glory, of symbol. White hair in that world meant wisdom and eternity, the Ancient of Days. Fire meant judgment and purity. Glowing bronze meant strength that had been through the furnace and come out unbreakable. Feet of bronze meant a foot that could not be moved. John isn't painting a face. He's describing an experience. The experience of standing in front of someone so radiant with glory that ordinary words collapse. He's not saying, here is what he looked like. He's saying, here is what it was like to be in his presence. And that distinction between a face and a presence is the key that unlocks everything, including the silence. Because now we can finally answer the question we've been holding since the beginning. Why don't the Gospels describe his face? For centuries, people assumed the answer was loss, that the information existed and simply didn't survive. But that's not it. Look at what the Gospel writers chose to record, and the silence starts to look deliberate. They didn't describe his face because his face was not the point. And I mean that in the most profound way possible. Think about who actually met him. A tax collector, despised by everyone. looks up into an ordinary face and hears, "Follow me," and stands up and leaves everything. Fishermen drop their nets. A woman caught in the worst moment of her life looks into that plain, sun-weathered face and finds for the first time someone who does not condemn her. Lepers, prostitutes, Roman soldiers, grieving mothers. Thousands of people looked at this unremarkable Galilean face, and something in them broke open. It was never about the bone structure. It was about what looked back at you through the eyes. The painting spent 2,000 years perfecting the frame and missing the picture. They gave him a beautiful face so you'd know he was special. But the Gospels are telling you something far more devastating. He didn't need a beautiful face. He walked around in the most ordinary face in the crowd, and it turned the world upside down anyway.
That's the thing the silence protects. If we had a portrait, an exact, verified face of Jesus, we would have worshipped the portrait. We'd have made it an idol. We'd have spent 2,000 years arguing about the shape of his nose instead of listening to a word he said. The silence isn't a gap in the record. It's a mercy. It keeps your eyes off the surface and on the only thing that ever mattered. So let me give you back the real man, not the painting. Him, a short, solid, dark-eyed Jewish man from a nowhere town in Galilee. Skin browned by the sun, hands hard and scarred from years of labor. A plain face, a face you'd have walked straight past in a market without a second glance. No halo, no glow, no flowing golden hair. Nothing that would make you desire him, exactly as the prophet said. And that is so much better than the painting. Do you see why? Because the painting keeps him at a distance, up on a wall, radiant, other, unreachable. The real Jesus stood at your eye level. He had dust on his feet and dirt under his nails and a working man's tired shoulders. He looked like a person you could actually walk up to, which is precisely the point, because ordinary people did walk up to him all day, every day, and he never turned them away. The most important face in human history was a face you would not have noticed. And maybe that's the most beautiful thing about it. He didn't come looking like a god on a golden throne. He came looking like one of us, so that not one of us could ever say he was too far above us to understand. He wore the face of the overlooked, so the overlooked would know he was one of them. So the next time you see that famous painting, the pale skin, the flowing hair, the soft European features, you'll know the truth. That's not him. That never was. The real one is harder to find and much harder to forget. He's in the crowd. He's the plain one, the one with the working hands and the sunburned face and the eyes you'd only understand if you got close enough to look into them. And he's still, to this day, easy to walk right past and still worth everything the moment you stop and actually look. If this changed the picture in your head, even a little, tell me in the comments. And tell me this, because I genuinely want to know. The Jesus you grew up picturing, what did he look like to you? Where did that image come from? Let's talk about it below. Subscribe if you'd like to keep seeing the Bible with fresh eyes. Pray for us, and God bless you.